Okay, greetings everyone. This is the 10th video in our Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra series, covering verse 31 out of about 162 verses. And now we've gotten up to Yukti number 5, technique number 5, as I count them. And I'll paste it into the chat window, and those of you watching on YouTube can comment section or the info section for the verse. Okay. So here's the verse in Sanskrit. You can follow along if you like. Tayāpūryāśu mūrdhāntaṃ bhaṅktvā bhrū-kṣepa-setunā nirvikalpaṃ manaḥ kṛtvā sarvordhve sarvagodgamaḥ. And what that means is, literally, having quickly filled the body up to the head with that energy, and having breached the knot of māyā with the dike of concentration between the eyebrows, and having freed the mind thereby from its thought-entrancement, one ascends to the all-pervasive state in the place above all. So here we have yet another verse that really can't be understood without commentary. I don't think most people could extract the practice just from the literal translation. So you need the commentary of a teacher, and preferably that teacher, in this case me, has also referenced the Sanskrit commentary on the verse, which I did. So Shivopadhyaya is our commentator, and he explains some of what this verse means. It seems to me he's not completely sure. He's not completely sure what the verse means, but he's definitely helpful. So the verse is a little bit mysterious. And at first I thought this is quite an advanced practice to come so early in the text. But as I've been contemplating it more and more lately, I think maybe it's really not that advanced, depending on how we read the implications of the words. So let's go through it more carefully, word by word. Now, first we see, and I posted the word-by-word breakdown already in the Facebook group. Having filled, right, with that. Now the word that, the pronoun that, is in the feminine. So this is another example of how you need to have Sanskrit grammar to fill in the requisite noun. Obviously it doesn't make sense just to say, having filled with that. But since that is in the feminine, what do? We look back to the antecedent noun in previous verses that is feminine, and that is Shakti, or prāna-śakti. And indeed, our commentator, Shivopadhyaya, concurs, he corroborates that, and says, yes, what we're talking about here is prāna-śakti. So that's why in my translation I have, having quickly filled the body up to the head with that energy, with that prāna-śakti, right? Even though energy isn't explicit in the verse, it must be the intended feminine noun. Okay, so we'll explain more what that means, but let's just keep going through the verse. The next thing is having breached with the dike of concentration between the eyebrows. Okay, so previously, I translated setu as bridge, and all of you are familiar with the word setu, no doubt, from your yoga classes, because you've done a pose called setu bandhasana, more properly setu bandhanasana, right? Bridge building pose, right? If I'm remembering the name right, it's something very close to that, right? So anyway, the word setu there, it is translated universally in modern yoga as bridge. But the great scholar of the Upanishads, Patrick Olivelle, whose translation of the Upanishads is the most accurate we have in English, not the most poetic, but certainly the most accurate. And Patrick Olivelle makes an important argument, for our purposes it's important, that setu originally and often meant dike rather than bridge. Now, what's a dike? Well, if you look at pictures of paddy fields, rice paddies, which, you know, were ubiquitous, at least in much of South India and Central India at this time, then the paddy fields are divided by these kind of earthen berms, which are dikes, okay? Now, how is this relevant for us? Well, at certain points, the farmer breaches the dike and allows water from one paddy field to flow through into another paddy field. Okay, so after much contemplation, I decided this is what's going on here. Well, actually, I also got help from the commentator, because he specifies, you know, that setu, dike, is here a metaphor, and that we're talking about a flow of energy like a flow of water. So that's the key clue that he says. He uses the phrase vari pravaham, a flow of water. So the only flow of water in the context of a dike is in this breach that's created by the farmer, right? You could also, I suppose, think of a flow of water under a bridge, but dike makes more sense because we have the verb breach here, having breached. It's a little odd to use the word with following that, having breached with the dike, but our author is trying to fit all his meaning into just, you know, 32 syllables, so maybe he can't get as precisely specific as one would want. So having breached with, or perhaps we should just translate through the dike, by means of concentration between the eyebrows. It's a little different from what I wrote in the chat window, but here's the idea then, right? That there's a kind of blockage at the level of the third eye, the Ajna chakra, and this blockage needs to be breached. So a passage needs to be opened up to allow the energy to flow through, just like that water flowing through the breach in the dike from one paddy field to another. And indeed, I've posted a couple photos in the Facebook group of what I'm talking about in terms of paddy fields, so that those of you who didn't grow up in rural South India can see what we're talking about. So what is being breached exactly? What is this blockage? Well, I put in brackets that it's probably the māyā-granthi, or the rudra-granthi is probably what's being talked about here. This subtle psychic blockage at this level, which is said to manifest in everyday experience as subject-object duality, meaning to say that you cannot experience unity consciousness, supposedly, until the psychic knot, the māyā-granthi, has been broken open. So this, we find this just very slightly later in the tradition, so it may well be what's intended here. Okay. So again, we'll go over this more practically. Right now, we're just still breaking down the verse. So having breached through the dike with this concentration between the eyebrows, and having thereby freed the mind from its thought-entrancement, freed the mind from vikalpas, from mental constructs, but we could understand this as the state of being kind of caught up in your own thoughts, entranced by your own thoughts, hypnotized by your own thoughts, which a lot of people are in meditation until they get over the idea that their thoughts are very significant, or that they will ever find real truth in their thoughts, or that they'll ever find themselves in their thoughts. When you get over that idea, you become free of thought entrancement. But here, it's described in terms of the energy body. It's described in terms of penetrating this Ajna chakra, the command center, it's sometimes translated, which is literally correct, actually. Ajna, command, among other meanings. So then, what's the fruit of the practice? Almost every verse gives a phala, or a fruit of the practice, the result. One ascends to the all-pervasive state in the place above all. So Doubtless, this is referring to the exact same thing that we were getting in previous verses. This verse is absolutely part of a flow of the previous verses. It cannot be taken on its own. And so that all-pervasive state is undoubtedly this highest chakra in the 12 chakra system of the Vijñāna-bhairava, which is called vyāpinī, which is located at the dwadashanta above the head, 12 finger widths above the head, or the width of 3 fists above the head, approximately. Might be a little different for you. So one ascends, consciousness, you could say, ascends to the all-pervasive state in the place above all, meaning the highest point in the energy body. And so obviously what's being implied here is that you experience all-pervasiveness. You experience consciousness as all-pervasive when you're able to reach to that highest center. So you experience yourself / consciousness, those being one and the same, as all-pervasive as a result of this practice. Okay? So, any questions on this literal translation of the verse before we actually talk a little bit more about what you do practically, and then we'll do it together. Okay, so I'll read it one more time. Having quickly filled the body up to the head with that prāna-śakti, and having breached with the dike of concentration between the eyebrows, and having thereby freed the mind from its thought-entrancement, one ascends to the all-pervasive state in the place above all. Okay, so I don't see any questions in the chat window. So now I'll talk about what do we actually do. And this, of course, is the most important part. If we don't get here, then the translation is not complete. And this is, of course, as I think many of you know, my main complaint with existing translations is they are not rendered in such a way that the reader can clearly, unambiguously extract the practice, what one is actually supposed to do, from the verse. So even though Singh, for example, is a good Sanskritist, even, and others, people who read Singh often don't actually get what they're supposed to do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be bothering to do my own translation. It's really for this purpose, to get this clarity for the sake of practice. Okay, so essentially, this is how I practice it, and it does require a little bit of inference. So there's a little leeway in exactly what's intended here. But if we just take the verse in the simplest possible sense, then what it involves, and we'll do it together in a moment, is sitting in your meditation posture and inhaling deeply while you imagine the prāna-śakti filling your body from your toes all the way up to the bridge of your nose. So it's sort of like, pouring water into a jug. The water level rises, okay? So even though in tantric yoga, inhale is down, as it is in real physical reality, right? Your nose being above your lungs, you're pulling the air in and down, but the prana level, as it were, rises like the water level in that metaphorical jug. So you're breathing in, imagining the prāna-śakti filling your body from the tips of your toes to the bridge of your nose. And you finish the inhale there at the bridge of your nose. And then you hold the breath, kumbhaka, while concentrating between the eyebrows, concentrating at that point. It's not necessary to actually knit the brows like that, just concentrating right there. And then when you feel you can't hold the breath any longer, so after 10 seconds, 20 seconds, whatever you can do without strain or stress. You should not be stressing yourself, or it's not really a meditation. Then at the end of that 10 seconds of kumbhaka, or whatever it is, you exhale and feel the energy, if you can, passing through that Agnya chakra and rising up and up to the space above the head, and then expanding into all-pervasiveness, okay? And indeed, again, I said you don't actually need to knit the brows, but when one does, one almost sees that dike breach, like the breach in the dike of the paddy fields. So I think all in all, it does make sense, even though, again, if you read most of the translations out there, you're kind of like, what? So let's just try it. Let's do it together. And again, you could read this practice as implying something a bit more complex, but as Yukti number 5, coming relatively early in the text, let's just assume that we can read it in the simplest possible way. So please adopt your meditation posture. For this practice, like some practices, but not all, it's very good to have an upright posture with the spine elongated. So take a couple of deep breaths. Just to get ready. And then with eyes half closed or all the way closed, initiate a very deep breath where you imagine the prāna-śakti filling you up from the tips of the toes all the way up, 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 finishing the inhale at the bridge of the nose. The prāna-śakti has filled you all the way to the bridge of the nose. Kumbhaka, pause, concentrate. Then exhale the rest of the way up, expanding awareness into all pervasiveness, filling all space. Okay, now pause. We'll do it again. I want to be clear, by the way, that simply doing that is not the complete practice. The complete practice is what happens when you do that over and over again, and you finally feel the energy actually piercing through that Ajna chakra, and it can feel like the top of your head sort of melts away. Sometimes it could feel like it explodes, but more commonly that it sort of melts away, and there's a palpable feeling of opening out into infinity. So if that happens, then you know the practice is finally working. And I'm not talking about, again, the feeling of imagining that. I'm talking about a very palpable feeling, much, much, much stronger than the feeling of imagining it. Okay. So another just little point, which is you want to keep the jaw relaxed, even though you're concentrating at that point. And concentration sometimes makes people go, gritting a little bit. That's not a yogic form of concentration. It's a gentle but very focused concentration. Jaw is still relaxed. Shoulders are still relaxed. Nothing's really tensing up here, okay? So let's try it again. And again, this is just practice, just rehearsal, that if you do it more and more, you may experience what the verse is talking about. So eyes half closed or all the way closed, jaw relaxed, shoulder blades sinking down the back. And then when you're ready, initiate a deep inhale, imagining or feeling prāna-śakti filling the body from the tips of the toes, filling, 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 all the way up to the level of the bridge of the nose. Pause, breath hold, concentrate. And then exhale through the Ajna chakra, up and out the crown of the head, expanding into infinite awareness, becoming the vastness. 2 more times. Deep inhale, filling the body with prāna-śakti up to the bridge of the nose. Not too fast, not too slow. Pause, concentrate, hold the breath. And exhale through the Ajna chakra, up and out the crown of the head, opening into infinite spaciousness. Become the spaciousness. And one more time. This time I won't talk you through it, but we'll just do it together. And breathe naturally. With this expanded, open, spacious feeling. Om. Okay, a couple of questions. By the way, if you have pranayama practice, then you will, each round will take quite a bit longer than for somebody who doesn't have a background of pranayama practice, you know. So just inhaling, breath pause, and the exhale, you know, that can be 40, 50, 60 seconds if you have that pranayama background. And if not, it's fine for it to be a much shorter cycle, like 20 seconds or something. As long as you're slightly pushing your edge, but not striving or stressing. And again, jaw must always be relaxed, right? So the concentration focal point is here. It's not here. It's not here, you know. Okay, Robin asks, is the focal point between the brows or back behind the eyes in the center of the brain at the pineal gland? And what she's referring to is the fact that Agnya chakra is understood in many sources to be in the center of the head, between my fingers, right? Behind this point, rather than this point itself. Now, here it clearly says bhrū-kṣepa, meaning this point between the eyebrows, okay? Now, what I would say about that, though, is after you do the practice with this as the focal point for a while, if it naturally shifts back into the central channel itself, into the Agnya point in the central channel, which indeed is behind this point, about at the center of the brain, fine, great. That would be, you know, a further iteration of the practice, a slightly more, or maybe significantly more advanced version of the practice. It should happen spontaneously after you've done the practice as taught for a while. Okay, Kendra asks, could this be an addition or clearer explanation of the supreme level you mentioned, verse 30, or a way to successfully deepen or complete your 3 rounds of verse 30? Yeah, I think this is very much possible because in this verse, we get the pronoun with that in the feminine. And so, as the commentator takes it as just as prāna-śakti, but it could also be taken as this phonemic power, this matrika-śakti, that is worked with in the previous verse. So it could be that this verse is understood as a kind of capstone of the practice done in the previous verse. And so what I would recommend for everyone is that when you get time, maybe once a week, just do all 5 of these yuktis in a row. Okay, so the breath pause or visarga meditation, the beams of light shining up the central channel, the electricity jumping from chakra to chakra, and the intoning of the vowels a, I, u, and so on in the 12 chakras. And then this practice, that's the first 5 yuktis of the text. If you do them in a row, it is quite powerful, and you do feel, oh, there's a flow here, there's a natural flow, these are all interconnected, and there is perhaps a vinyasa here. Like in modern asana, we have the concept of vinyasa, a flow from one pose or posture to another, from one asana to another. I do think these 5 are intended as a vinyasa flow, not to say you have to do it that way. You could do any one of them separately. But I do think they're intended as a flow because linguistically, again, we get verses that are dependent on the language and nouns and verbs of the previous verses. And you couldn't understand them otherwise unless you were bringing down nouns and verbs from previous verses. So I think we have a 5 yukti vinyasa here. Again, not to say that you have to do it that way. Okay, and I think the vinyasa ends here because the next practice is quite different and doesn't seem to be dependent on the prior practices. And we'll cover that next week. Okay, Randall asks, are we holding the breath with the diaphragm? Yes, whenever a kumbhaka is prescribed, if that's possible for you, you're holding the breath with the strength of the diaphragm, not by locking your throat closed. So it feels very different. And if you're not clear on the difference, ask your yoga teacher, right? So throat open, diaphragm remains toned to keep the breath hold, as opposed to locking close the throat. And Martin asks, when you reach the point between the eyebrows, should you have a sense of holding back the energy, i.e. keeping the gate closed before letting it travel up? Yes, it's like a sense of building the energy at this point and then, whoosh, sort of exhaling it through that breach in the dike, or making the breach in the dike, as it were. Yeah, Gerald asks, can you do all 5 of the yuktis in the same session? Absolutely. I think so. You would just, remember yukti number 4 is presented in 4 slightly different ways, very slightly different. You would, just do whichever of those it makes the most sense to you. But again, treating it as one yukti. Jackie asks, is there any slight extension of the breath at the crown? Well, it's like a sort of thing. That's how I experience it. I don't know that there's one right way to experience it per se. Tammy asks, do we pause after the out breath as well? Yes, if that's available to you. For some people, that induces panic, especially after a long breath hold. But if it's available to you, you can do a little pause and a little uddiyana bandha, or you can just breathe naturally, but tiny, tiny breaths, because you're in this expanded state, hopefully, of feeling the vastness of consciousness, and you're just doing these very tiny, tiny little breath, tiny, tiny breaths, little breath spanda. Okay, I think that's all the questions, and we're at exactly 30 minutes, which I'm trying to keep as the maximum length of the videos. So thank you, everyone, and please do see the post in the Facebook group that has the images and the word-by-word breakdown and alternate translations as well, even though I think some of those translations are not correct. I present them for your study. Okay. Thank you very much. Nice to be with you all. Oh, and lastly, let me just mention, for those who don't know, in just a few days, I'll be in Stockholm and then London for 10 days or so, teaching workshops at Tri-Yoga, mainly Tri-Yoga Camden, also one at Shoreditch. Hope to see you there if you're in the area. Some people are even flying over from, Berlin and other places. So why not? Absolutely. These workshops are indeed very, very popular and well loved, I'm gratified to say, and they happen every year around this time. That's been the pattern so far anyway. Next year is not yet planned or booked, but hopefully it'll happen again. So 10 days in London, that's 22nd through the 30th. Maybe that's just 8 days. But anyway, then a retreat in Italy, at the southern tip of Italy. So there's still a few spots for that tantric yoga retreat. And then I'll be back here in Colorado. So hope to see you at one of those places. And deep thank yous to the patrons on Patreon, whose continued support makes these free teachings and free courses possible. And this particular course we expect to continue for another year. So patrons, please keep patronizing. I suppose that's not quite the right verb. Supporting. And we hope you join us on Patreon if you're interested in Abhinavagupta's Tantra Sara, the essence of the Tantras. A beautiful text. We're just getting to the 5th chapter of that text. So it's a great time to join. And that 5th chapter is all about yoga. It's all about tantric yoga. So perfect. See you soon. Nice to be with you all. Om.